Hey everybody, welcome back. Steven here, Northwest Small Batch Brewing. And today is a brew talk, and it'll be an interesting one. So it has to do with bottling or canning your beer. Whether you're doing it to age it or give it away to friends or whatnot, what is the best way? It's been a challenge, I think, for every home brewer since the beginning of time. Originally you just use some sugar, right? And it carbonates the beer in the can after about a couple weeks. However, it just seems like you never quite get the right amount of sugar, right? It's always either undercarbonated or really overcarbonated. And it's sort of a unicorn when it turns out just right. So I recently was talking to a home brewer that uses a beer gun, and a lot of people use a beer gun. There's other devices that are not referred to as a beer gun, but they do the same thing. They basically push the beer from the bottom of the can or bottle all the way up to the top. Thus, you have less splashing and potential for oxygen to get in. And it also has a button on it, so if you hook it up to CO2, you can squirt CO2 into the can. Let's talk about that. So, let me back up. So, one of the problems is that these beer guns are a pain to use. They're a pain to hook up. They leak everywhere. They're just a hassle, and it makes really we want to make canning or bottling as simple and quick and easy as we can, because it's not a really fun process no matter how you do it. So, let me start by saying this: the CO2. I'm not on the CO2 bandwagon. There was a video, and I've said this a few times. You'd have to go out and find it. I don't know which one it was. I'm trying to remember who it was. So it was down in Australia, because they went. I'm pretty sure that it was Kegland had a video where they went to a lab because they were designing something, and as an off sort of question, not related to that, they asked this lab, a scientific lab. They said, does a layer of CO2 actually block oxygen, like for your beer? Can that create like a blanket over your beer? And the lab said no, that's really just a myth. They said basically, if you think about it, on a microscopic level, or however you want to call it, you got to have a like electron microscope to be able to see these atoms, but they're pretty far apart in the relativity of their size, and there's nothing that would keep oxygen from just floating right on by past the CO2. Also, CO2 has oxygen in it, so it's part oxygen already. And I think people get the, thought that, oh, well, CO2 is heavier. I mean, if you spray CO2 and you can see it and it seems to sink, CO2 is what's in a lot of fire extinguishers and puts out fires. I don't know, but basically the lab said it's really not doing you anything, right? You're just not getting the benefit that you think you're getting. So I'm not really on the bandwagon that squirting CO2 into this can is going to fill it with CO2. First of all, if it's a can, look at the opening on this thing. I mean, there's nothing holding that CO2 in. You got to be fast. And then you got to immediately fill it from the bottom up. And I guess the idea is as it's filling, it's pushing that CO2 back out of the can. And then you put the lid on it. But then by the time it does that, what happens? There's no more CO2 because you're filling it right up to the top and putting the lid on. Same thing with, a bottle, you leave a little bit of headroom. But basically, you pushed all the CO2 out anyway. And you're still going to have oxygen, hitting the top of that beer, no matter what you do. So I just don't think the CO2 does that much. I think it's something that people put too much stock into. That being said, I don't use a beer gun. They're a pain to use. I just don't think that they really provide that much of a benefit. If you're getting a can or bottle beer, I wouldn't do a hoppy beer, right? I would stay away from bottling or canning, your hazy IPAs or, Westies and anything that's super hoppy. I've done pale ales and stuff, and they seem to hold up pretty well. But if you dry hop anything especially, the hops are just going to degrade super fast. You can't keep that oxygen away. It's better just to have it kegged. Or if you're going to bottle it, hopefully that person will drink it within the next day or two, right? That being said, here's how I do it, because that's probably what you're wondering, right? How do I can or bottle my beer? So I take the beer, like this one, for example, is the one that I posted recently. This was my sort of Franken beer. It's a Munich sort of ale. And I let it carbonate in the keg for a week. Slow carb in the keg for a week. That gives it time to cold crash, drops everything out of suspension, use a floating dip tube. And this was kegged right off of the fermenter. I don't even use a keg anymore. I just do it right off the fermenter. So 1 week in the kegerator, cold crashed, use a floating dip tube. It's carbonated at that point, however you want to put it. I usually do around 12 psi for pressure. So when you go to bottle it, like in the can or the bottle, you have to turn the pressure down, because otherwise it's going to come out too fast, too hard, and create a lot of foam, and it doesn't work. So you take pressure down to like 2 psi, 3 psi, bleed the excess out of your keg, and then when you pour it, it's going to come out much slower and smoother. And then that's what I do. I just bottle it right from the kegerator, right from the tap. Obviously, I hold the bottle or can at an angle so it's going down the side and not splashing. And then I put just the tiniest pinch of sugar. And I've been playing around with a tiny little pinch of absorbic acid, is what it's called. And that's supposed to absorb oxygen. Whether it does or not, I don't know. Also, if you use a bunch of it, it's going to give like an orange, like citrusy flavor to your beer. Now this is pretty stiff, but not super stiff. And it was carbonated in the keg, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. Remember, this had just a pinch of sugar to create a little extra pressure in the bottle. I did put just a pinch of absorbic acid in this one as well. And you can see it's not overcarbonated. It didn't explode on me. It did have some pressure in it so that it would, hold and eat up some of that if there's any oxygen in there. Not much head retention coming out on this, but smells good. And there's definitely carbonation. So, if you're a little worried about it, you can put, you play with it until you get it right, but just a little pinch of sugar is all it takes to get the pressure built up in the can. And, I find that's the easiest way to bottle or can stuff is you won't get bottle bombs that way. Now, the last thing I will say is that instead of using sugar, if you remember to do this, that's what I sometimes forget, but if you put aside some of your original wort before you put the yeast in and stick it in the freezer, and there's a calculator if you want to know how much, depending on how many cans you're going to do. You get to the point though where it's pretty much about the same amount every time, so you don't have to always just measure it out. But basically, you put that in the freezer, and then when you're ready to can, you thaw it out and just boil it for like 5 minutes to make sure it's sanitized, and then you just use the tiniest little squirt of that in each can. I mean, remember, it's already carbonated from the keg. And that will actually work really well. It's called a guile, and will help to reduce off flavors, and it just adds more flavor to your beer. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. That's how I do my cans and bottles. I'll be back next week for another fun video. And until then, keep on brewing.